Good morning to you this morning and welcome to Forest Heights Baptist Church here at 804 Tangier Drive in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. We're glad to have you here this morning. If you have your Bible, I invite you to turn with us to 1 Samuel chapter 22. We're reading in verse 6 this morning and down through the end of the chapter, which would be verse 23, I believe. So 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 6, we'll begin reading, and I'm reading from the NIV, and I think you'll be able to follow along with me. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul was seated, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree on the hill of Gibeah, with all of his officers standing by his side. He said to them, "Listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give you all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me any that my son has incited my servant to lie and wait for me as he does today." But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and he also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all the men of his family who were priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. And Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about the whole affair." But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." Then the king ordered the guards at his side, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me." But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The king then ordered Doeg, "You turn and strike down the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. And that day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put the sword to Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. But one son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And then David said to Abiathar, "That day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would surely tell Saul, 'I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me too. You are safe with me.'" Well, you can see here that there are a lot of things going on here, and I want to take a note of them. Some of you have been following along with us, and I hope you all will. And if you haven't, you can catch up by just reading through the scriptures. We're working our way through 1 Samuel here. And if you haven't got the impression that fear is a predominant theme, and the reactions to it and the different playouts of that, I guess, are you might have missed it. I want to point you to that there's a lot of things going on here, and we're seeing it played out before us. A battle of two kings, I guess you could say. Here, the king Saul, who the people of Israel asked for against God, and God granted them that king and told them that he would do such things as he's already been doing, and all the other kings they would have. And then the one that God anointed himself in response to Saul's predicted rebellion and bad job, God anoints, through Samuel, anoints David as king. So he's yet to ascend to that position in the world, but he is king that God has picked. So we have a battle here between the two of them, and it's being played out before us, and we see the human elements of it. And this time, I think we can see some things I would put under the heading of fear. Fear, what will we do with it? All of us have fear. All of us suffer from fear from time to time. And we need to understand it and understand what it can do and recognize these things and then take action against them to try to cause them to work in our favor. Fear can of course, cause problems, and fear can also strengthen you in some ways. But let's look at the scripture and see if we can see what we see played out here and help us to figure this out. The first thing I see about fear is, here, of course, is fear destroys. And the overall picture here is it has a lot of different ways of doing that. Fear destroys things. Our fear, improperly understood and properly handled, will destroy stuff. Saul's fear destroyed him. It destroyed him, and it destroyed other things. The first thing we see is it destroyed a community. What I mean by that is, notice in the first few verses, he's sitting on the side. He's gathered his special troops around him, his leaders and stuff in verse 6. And they're sitting there, and he knows that what's happened. And he's sitting there stewing about it under this tree. And he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. Of course, we know that he's after David because he fears David taking over. This reminds you of anybody in the New Testament who was fearful of the one who was being called king. A tiny little baby that was going to be born or had been born brought the fear of the great leader Herod, such that he killed everybody in the town that Jesus was born in. Well, Saul is not certainly not immune to that. He did the same thing. That kind of sets up this kind of pattern that we see in the Bible. If you look for these things, I think they're there. God shows us how this works. But he says to these men, these are Benjamites, these are his close, because he's from the tribe of Benjamin. That would likely make sense that he would have these as his closest advisors. But we also know that in amongst these, before we get to that part there where we read it, that Doeg, who's an Edomite means that he was a descendant of Esau, who was the brother of Jacob, who would always at some point be some sort of enmity between those two clans, Jacob's and Esau's. And the Edomites had certainly demonstrated their willingness to go against their kinfolks. But anyway, Doeg's in there, so it doesn't mean that Saul had all these good guys in there. His kinfolks in there, if you will, is from the tribe of Benjamin, and of course David was from the tribe of Judah. So there's already setting up this tension here, and Saul tries to take advantage of that. Now they're all Israelites, and they're all brothers, and they're all commanded by God to take care of one another. But see how Saul tries to break them up. He talks to them about what all he would do for them. Would David do this? So he immediately sets up this political play that goes on and on and on throughout history of trying to set one against the other, and offers them all these things that he would do for them. Would he do this? Would he do that? Well, of course, they don't know what he would do for them, but Saul seems to think that he wouldn't. He proposes that he wouldn't do that. And so he causes a division, or tries to set up a division in the community. Fear will do that. Fear will cause the need to break up people. We live in a world today that in the modern sense is in disunity. Everybody, whatever position you take, agrees that there's a great deal of disunity brought on by the next problem that Saul tries to create, is a lack of trust. Fear causes a lack of trust. Down in verse 9, he calls on his men, and see Doeg sitting there, and he seizes an opportunity to wedge in here. So he offers up what happened. Why is this going on? And so this creates a tension. Here is the enemy of Israel and the enemy of the people of Jacob, historically, Doeg. And so he is going to be allowed to offer in some insights here. And this is all part of the breaking of trust that Saul has brought on because of his own fears and his insecurities. And so Doeg lays out this case about these priests. So he is taking on the priest. He's laying it a bit at the foot of the priest. And so he offers up this idea that Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for David, which is kind of an interesting thing because we didn't really understand that he got a hold of that was something that were revealed to us in the words of the scripture, but he seems to imply that this is something he did, and you could just get the tone of it. It's hard to pick it out here, but the tone of this idea that he's accusing the priest, so he's laying the blame of this at the priest's feet, and so that creates a lack of trust, or he's trying to create a lack of trust, and Saul, of course, capitalizes on that. And he and his own fear has trying to destroy the community that exists within the Israel. He also his lack of trust in even the priest, and Doeg is the instrument for that, I guess, the outward instrument. And then he destroys people because he literally had Doeg. Later on, we're going to see in verse 16 and so we read it, that Doeg actually killed 85 people right there, and then he went on to kill everybody, one man, woman, and children back in the town of Nob. So Saul's fear destroyed community, trust, and people. That's kind of a downward spiral there, and so we have to be careful about fear. Our fears can cause us to have lots of problems. The other thing I see here, not only does it destroy, and that's drastic enough, but it also, in behind this, is there's some other things going on here. In behind this, it kind of tends to delude us. Fear will delude you. Doeg here represents this outsider, if you will, who interjects himself into this situation. We don't know why he was at Nob. We don't know why he was here. But apparently he has inserted himself. Now, those of you who've been studying with us in our Sunday school book about Jude have run across some things probably in the last few weeks where we see that Jude's writing about people who have inserted themselves, if you will, to use my word, have crept in, I think is what the Bible says, in there. And so we have to watch out for that. And Saul is deluded by this. Now, Doeg, if the Edomite, we could call him an opportunist. An opportunist. What's an opportunist? Well, opportunists are artists that telling people what they want to hear. And it seems to be a fact if you look throughout history. And again, there's benefits to looking at history. If you are trying to figure out how people are going to be, people haven't changed a whole lot. I know people don't like to hear that, but certain things haven't changed a whole lot. And insecure people put people around them that will tell them what they want to hear. And there are plenty of people who are wonderful at this and would love to do this because they see an opportunity for themselves in advancing their own agenda, their own position, their own authority, their own whatever, by telling people in authority, insecure people, what they want to hear so that they can then appear to be on their side and get elevated in some way along the way. That's what Doeg. Doeg is an opportunist of the greatest degree. We find that these things all over. I don't think I need to try to illustrate it by picking on anybody in particular. You just look around. These people who are insecure are always going to have people around them. We used to call them yes men, but they could be yes women, I suppose, too. There are people who are going to always agree with the leader no matter what because they don't want to, they want to advance themselves. They're not interested in what the facts are. The truth is, and Doeg is this guy. He sees this opportunity and he has advanced his own agenda here with Saul. And he tells him in verse 8 and 9 all these things. And he even throws in the extra for no extra charge, the part about Ahimelech inquiring of the Lord for David. Which we find is an interesting interjection there. So, and then down in verse 18 and 19, when the troops would not raise a hand against the priest, even under Saul's order. And by the way, the king has absolute authority, and so their resisting of him or lack of following his orders could have brought their own death about. But Doeg quickly volunteers to take up the job. And he gets that job. So Doeg has deluded Saul. Saul is so insecure, and his fear has led to his rage and his anger that he's blinded by these things. He can't see it. The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5:8, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Fear is an opportunity for the devil, and he is an opportunist, if he's nothing else, to jump upon these things. And we need to be careful of them and watch out, because fear and these things, we know Saul has fear, we know he's insecure, and these insecurities and fear manifest himself in Saul's life outwardly a lot of times as rage and anger that just goes beyond control. Anger that's out of control becomes rage, and Saul has demonstrated his willingness and his ability to do this, and that opens him up, right, for these other damaging things that brings about, allowing Doeg here to get into his head, and then Saul killing through Doeg all these people. So this is that these priests, I mean, that right there ought to have given him pause, that the fact that he was going to kill all the priests. Ahimelech says, look, I didn't know anything about all this stuff. I didn't understand any of this. And so, as I said, this fear destroys, it deludes, and it blinds. It will blind you. Have you heard people going in a blind rage? We even understand that people get so engaged and their eyes roll back in their head, so to speak, and they can't see. They don't see what's in front of them. They just act. They go into that, what we sometimes is a blame on animals, that animalistic thing. It blinds them. He blinded him to the reason. Ahimelech gives and lays out this. He answers these charges that Doeg has brought against him. And he says, look, Saul charges him, says, why have you done this to me? And Ahimelech, in verse 13, he says, why have you conspired against me and laid all this out? Ahimelech answers, he says, who has of all your servants is disloyal? He doesn't say, I didn't give David bread. He doesn't say anything like that. He answers, he says, listen, David is your loyal, he's your son-in-law. Ahimelech reasons on the grounds that David is not Saul's enemy, and points out to the things that David has done that should demonstrate to Saul that he's not the enemy that Saul is fearful of, right? And so he also says, listen, did I inquire for him? Sure. Was it the first time? No, I've done it many times. Where was all this then? And of course, Saul is so blinded by his rage and his fear that he can't hear the reason or the truth. This is what happens to people when they become caught up in this fearful rage, anger circle, is they don't hear reason. You cannot reason with them. Reasons don't matter. They just act. And they act in the most base way because the devil has seized them at this opportunity and walked into there. And the truth doesn't matter. Reason doesn't matter. Nothing matters. All they can do is just kill everything around them in one way or the other, whether it's physically or emotionally, psychologically. These are the people that tend to fly in these rages that are very abusive, and in the non-physical way, maybe they're physically abusive too, because they cannot be reasoned with. Nothing matters to them. They're in there. And look, what goes on is not something that's new, as we see here in demonstrating the Old Testament. And there are plenty of places where people in the Old Testament talk about it, the New Testament talk about the rage, or you can get the picture of the rage. But studies in modern history, modern times, studies have shown that people can change their perceptions of reality to fit their belief. What does that mean? Well, what is actually happening in front of them, what's laying out there in front of them, which is what Ahimelech is actually doing here. He's laying out what is actually happened. David has done nothing but help you, been your loyal servant, faithful and all that, and it's right there in front of you. All you got to do, you don't have to ask me. You can look around and what's happened, go take inventory of it. And Saul believes that David is out for him, and he refuses to see the truth. You cannot see it. There are plenty of people today in all kinds of walks of life that the facts don't matter. The facts don't matter. I didn't say it. I never did it. I wasn't there. Even if there's videotape, if there's audio tape, if 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 people, I don't know. And the myriad numbers of ways of altering that perception to fit what they believe is there. They refuse to see the facts. They refuse to see the truth. The Bible is the Word of God, and it is the truth. Jesus says, I am the truth. And the truth is Jesus, a person, and the person Jesus is the author of the Bible, writes the Bible, gives us the Bible. It's about Him, it's for Him, and it's for us. He wrote it for our benefit. However, people cannot see it. They read the words on the page, and that's not it. It doesn't matter. Any valid interpretation of it doesn't count. That's not what they wanted to believe. So they've taken the Bible and turned it into whatever they want it to be. It supports this lifestyle. It supports this sin. It backs up this. How in the world can these things happen? How can, some large religious group back not too many years ago sat down and drew up a document that declared that Christians and Muslims were all on the same page and worshiped the same God and were all in pretty good shape. Right? How'd they come up with that? Had a big conference, a world conference, wrote a long docket letter and all that stuff, got signed by what everybody on TV and everybody else, I guess, thinks is the only representations of the Christians, and that would be the Pope, and that's not true. But the fact is that he did, and it was signed by him, and they showed him and at the time the recognized reigning imam of the Muslim community in the world, actually embracing and kissing, so that they could solidify this. And there are no two religious groups that are any more opposed to one another or disagree on their theological terms or anything else than these two. But they write this all down, they write this all down and put this all in writing, hug and kiss, and then they go back to their homes and cast and declare each other anathema, meaning they're both wrong. Either one, the other one's wrong. The point is, they're blinded, and people take that and read into that all kinds of things. So, be careful of fear. Saul's fear leads to anger and rage destroys. Fear deludes, and the devil's an opportunist who will jump in there. Fear blinds. This is something that happens. It blinds us to the truth. We refuse to see the truth, no matter what it is. You may run into people like this. You have to be careful. You have to be understand what's going on. Don't stand there and keep hammering on the wall. One of those nails may be a primer to set off a bomb in your face, so let it go, okay? Walk away and leave them, because they're not going to be reasoned with. Reason won't work, right? Reason, as someone told me one time, a professor of mine said, reason won't get out what reason didn't put in. So, of course, a person like me, as kind of weird as I am, I found that I understood what he meant. I found that just unbelievable, and I've been guilty of beating my head against the wall a lot of times. And of course, what happened to all my hair. But anyway, the thing that fear does, though, as I said earlier, and I alluded to at the beginning, fear can cause all kind of problems, or fear can strengthen you. It depends on how you take it. So one of the things I want to end with is the strengthening of fear, how fear can strengthen us and what's necessary to accomplish that. Remember now, as Doeg has killed all of these priests, I want to draw your attention, though, to one piece of side information here. Ahimelech is a great, or some number of greats grandson of somebody that we've read about before, Eli. And Eli was declared to be anathema. God said, Eli, your house, no one will serve long, will live long in your house. You will not survive forever. Your people and your descendants, which would have been priests, and Ahimelech as a priest after Eli, doesn't mean he was sinned like Eli did. We find he didn't here. And in fact, he did everything right. But the judgment of God upon the house of Eli has its consequence, or collateral damage, if you will, on Ahimelech and all of his people except one. Abiathar. Abiathar is the one priest who escaped. He is also the last descendant of Eli in the priesthood. Now, Abiathar escaped with the ephod, which was symbolic of the priesthood. So he becomes the one priest who survives. God, in his infinite wisdom and plan, saw all this down the road, saw it all in once, because God lives in the eternal now and sees everything as it is today, yesterday, and tomorrow, all in the same time. And he saw this, and Abiathar was willing to go to David, takes the ephod, he escapes. God saw that through, I think, certainly. And he goes to David and serves David, as it turns out, and I'll give you a little spin up ahead of you, for each of you here. He serves David all the way to Solomon. It was Solomon who took him out of the priesthood after David, but he serves with David all the time of David's reign, from here on forward. And that's something to be said for David in his own fear of Saul, that he acts in a correct way. But let's go on. Let's go back a little bit. I don't want to leave that behind, because Doeg, the Edomite, serves as a hand, as an evil person who served the purposes of God in accomplishing something that was promised a long time ago. Now look, just because they were descendants of Eli did not mean, and by the way, I think this was one of the Phinehas's children, but anyway, the sons of Eli who brought this whole thing on, and Eli was guilty because he didn't do anything about his sons, in case you didn't read the backstory. But the point is, doesn't mean he was a bad person or that he didn't serve God. You see, you can have the judgment of God gets exercised, and I tell people this all the time. Listen, just because somebody died in a horrible situation at the hands of a horrible thing does not mean God was against them, or that they're going to hell or anything like that. It means that they were a part of the plan of God in that, and that their death, however horrible it was, in the service of, if doing the right thing in service of God, means what the Bible promises. They go to heaven. You know, so Ahimelech is not going to hell because Eli was his great-great-great-great-grandfather, and God pronounced judgment on the house of Eli. All right? God pronounced judgment on the world and all the humans in it, and all of them are not going to hell. Only those who refuse the grace and mercy and forgiveness of Jesus. All right, so don't misread this. Don't make that something Eli did. He was a man who had sinned, but God, here he demonstrates that he is faithful, even in the face of the king who absolutely had authority to kill him, and did. He was willing to stand up for David, what was right. He stood up for what was right to his own, not just his, but all the other priests, right? Saul demonstrates he has no regard for God or nothing. That's what the world is today. We live in a world where the government has no regard for God. They don't have any regard for God. Our great American government that I love to death, and the people represented, generally speaking, have no regard to the things of God. No regard for the authority of God. And that's why they can just willy-nilly cast all these things aside, all this stuff aside. But anyway, let's see what happens to David here and how he grows in his own fear. David had run from Saul, right? He finds himself down there in verse 22, if you will. He tells David, Abiathar tells David what happened. He joins David, and guess what? What does David? First thing David do? He tells David exactly what happens. Notice that David's reaction to this situation was. He says, that day, David said to Abiathar, verse 22, that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. What is that? What do we call that? That's a confession. David confessed his sin, that he drug in Ahimelech and caused this situation because of his own fear. His fear caused him to sin. His sin resulted in the death of all of Abiathar's family, all of them. Men, women, children. He confessed his sin of lying to Ahimelech, and therefore this is the David that we hear so much about, that has the heart of God, that was a man like after God's own heart. David sinned. So we all sin. That's not the condition. It's not that we don't sin, we do. The question is what happens next. David here demonstrates way early that he confesses his sin. He recognizes what happened. And David confessed it. And because he does that, I believe God hears that, knows that. And then David says, stay with me. So he's willing to take Abiathar. He recognizes what he's done, and now he wants to do the right thing, right? He's confessed it. He feels like he owes a responsibility to Abiathar. And he's the priest of God, the only living priest of God in that situation there. And he says, stay with me because he's trying to kill you too, and I'll keep you safe. He takes on that responsibility. Psalm 37:9, which was written, I think, during this time. But anyway, it says, for those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. David has put his hope in God. He is out of options from himself, and he's run, and he senses immediately what he has done to contribute to this, and he confesses his sin. He owes up. Now look, this is another thing here. Abiathar is a man without a country or a family, but he does have the priesthood. And the priesthood of God is not located in a location, a spot, or it's not about the clothes. But imagine if you're Abiathar, you have run to David. David says, I was the one who set this ahead. Now, Saul brought it about, and that doesn't absolve him, right? Because he was in a rage about it. David says, I brought this on because I said this, and he apparently had a knowledge of Doeg being in the area, so he realizes that he should have known better and should have taken a better account of himself there. And we also know when we were there that David could have said more clearly what was going on. But he didn't, so there it is, he owns it. And here is Abiathar, a man who without a country, without a place, a priesthood, a place to worship, but he's a priest, and David says, stay with me, I'll take care of you. I am responsible, in other words, for you. So this, remember that Moses, when Jah was to hold his arms up so that the mighty power of God. What happened was Moses was the man, right? His arms began to sag, kind of droop down. They sent people to prop his arms up. People held Moses up, his arms literally. And we talk about holding people up in prayer. We talk about supporting people. We talk about helping people, right? And when they're under a lot of pressure. And you all this morning, I won't go into that here for the video, but you all this morning know what I'm talking about. When we struggle, somebody jumps in and says, it's out of my character, I'm not in that lane, but listen, I'll try to help you out. And I really appreciate that. As we all do when we're helped. So in a sense, David, by taking responsibility, owning it, and then saying, stay with me, I will keep you safe. He is holding up the arms of Abiathar, a man without family, right? Without a country, so to speak. So the real king here is the one God anoints, and David is acting like a king. I mean, he has faults, but he acted like a king. He took responsibility. He confessed his sins and moved out, at least in that sense. And Abiathar, we will know if you follow along ahead of time, Abiathar heard the confession of David because he said it out in front of him. He spoke it in front of him, right? Abiathar hears that and doesn't react to that in any negative way, and thereby holds up David. And we see David and Abiathar's relationship, at least in the sense that David, for the whole kingship of David, from now on until Solomon comes along, takes over, that Abiathar is the priest. He stays with David. So in a sense, they hold each other up. They help each other. David lifts the arms of Abiathar, or Abiathar lifts up the arms of David in a sense, by saying, listen, don't worry about that. Stay with me. He could have said, I'm never going to be around you, but he doesn't. So what do we get from this? So in the sense, this fear of David and this, he takes his confession to God, he takes it to God, and God uses that to strengthen us. God forgives our problems when we go to him in confession, and he strengthens us. It grows us. It teaches us where we put our trust. So let's pray and ask God to give us a teachable spirit. By the way, a teachable spirit in the New Testament, for those of you who read in some of these other English versions, is the word meek. Meek is not weak. Meek is strong. Meek is a teachable person. Person who can be taught, who realizes there's something more than what they already knew. So we need to be those kind of people. People who reflect and learn from our mistakes. Open to what God is willing to tell us. The other thing I would say that we can learn from this and get from this fear is that we are not to be deluded. Do not allow yourself to be deluded. The devil is looking for opportunity. So we need to submit ourselves unto God, and we can persevere. That's what happened to David. David has not allowed himself to be deluded. His fear got the best of him. He gave into it, lied to Ahimelech. The consequences are laid out before him. He's like Nathan when he pointed his finger at David later on, and he comes and owns the problem. So the question we have to ask ourselves today is, which one are we going to do? Which one will it be for us when we can counter by our fear that surely comes to every life and every person? Will we be godless deluders, be deluded by the godlessness like Saul, godless delusion, blinded by our rage and anger or other emotional reactions to our fear? Or will we be like David, godly destiny, God's destiny, letting God show us the path? You see, David's fear could have been on the same level as Saul's fear in a sense, but they react differently. They both sin, but David confesses his sin, and God keeps him on the path that he has laid out for him. The confessed sin, meekness, and he takes responsibility for this. He doesn't just confess, he does what he can to make amends, if you will, to make that. God takes that and uses it. In our lives, when we come to Jesus, what do? We come to Jesus and confess our sin, for we're surely sinners. And we trust that Jesus and God forgive us in Christ. That's what the Bible says. The Bible says he forgives us. And then what is our responsibility? Well, we are to be followers, disciples. That's learners, followers of Jesus, learners of Jesus, and responsible for what we learn. To me, this is the Christian faith. It's trusting God to forgive you, trusting God with our sinful lives, and then be willing to learn what God has for us, to follow his plan, and then to follow it, to do it. People fall down on all places along that path from time to time, but I think the greatest seems to be some of those who have taken that their confession of their sins is to forget to follow, to be responsible for that which Jesus has given us. I hope today that we can be that person that follows God, the plan God has for our life, to prosper us and not to hurt us, not to harm us. Would you pray with me this morning? Heavenly Father, thank you this morning, Lord. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the answers that you give us to these situations we see, and help us to see them in all these places, the humanness of it, the fear. We all suffer this morning, Lord, from fears. Help us to take those to you. When we fail, Lord, help us to quickly confess. And Lord, to be willing to submit to you and not cave into the opportunist. Allow ourselves to come before you. And then, Lord, let us walk that walk. Take responsibility. Do those things that you've given us to do. We pray these things this morning in the powerful and precious name of Jesus. Amen.